and welcome back to the MHP Show podcast. I am your host, Derek Vickers, and here on the MHP Show, we talk about anything and everything that has to do with mobile home parks, operations, running the business, acquiring deals, selling deals, finding deals, talking about best practices and all kinds of stuff and crazy stories that happen with mobile home parks. So here we are today. Actually, it's been a minute since I've actually done a solo episode. And I'm out on the road in LA right now. And, I still got to bring this weekly podcast to you guys because I have a fantastic and an awesome time actually doing it. And also, guys, come on, leave a comment, hit the like button on iTunes, Spotify. That helps us get knocked up in the rankings. So if you do that, I'd really appreciate it if you're enjoying the show. I've gotten tons of great feedback from people. Hey, I listen to your show every week. I mean, I think it's awesome. So, do that. All right. So now we're going to get into the show here. And this is something I wanted to talk about as we're doing Underwriting 101 is what this episode is. And now when we're talking about underwriting, what exactly are we looking at? Well, you're actually determining the underlying asset's value, right? And people that are new in the business, they may not understand exactly how to do that yet. And that's what we're going to talk about today because when I was new, it was like, man, how do I tell if a deal's even good or not? Right? How do I tell that? How do I actually look at a deal, see if it's good, and see if it's even worth my time of putting in this time and effort in? Right? And so when we're underwriting, there's just a couple different definitions of underwriting, but we're really determining the asset's value or its ability to produce cash flow now and ongoing into the future. All right. So as we're talking about underwriting, you're calling sellers, you're on the phone with sellers. Like, what information do you need to actually figure out if this deal is good or not? Right. So there's really three basic things that you need. You need the number of lots, really occupied lots. And we'll talk about vacant pads, valuing those here in a second. But we need the number of occupied lots, the amount of lot rent that they're paying, and the utility setup. All right. Now, why do we need those things? Well, let's just take this simple example. They're all tenant-owned homes. Okay. You don't own any of the homes as you're acquiring the park. So you need to know how many people are there paying rent today to determine the value. Because if you're talking to a seller on the phone, they're like, oh, I got 50 pads, but really only 40 of them are paying, right? That valuation is going to be, dramatically different than if you're valuing that as 100% occupied, right? So you need to know the occupied pad amount, lot count, and then the utility setup. And I know you need to know park-owned homes, and we're going to talk about that. But let's just say we have a basic lot rent deal. Okay, city utilities, just a perfect deal that doesn't exist. Right. And I'm going to, if you're listening to this, I'm going to try and talk through it, but also the video will be on YouTube so you can see some of this stuff as well. So I'll give an example here of a deal that we are actually looking at. And, whatever, like it is what it is. Like I'm not really showing you this I just want to show you kind of the basic calculation of this. So if you look at this little sheet that we have here, so it's a 26 lot deal. Now the rent on this beast is $325. It's in a great market. Now, when we're looking at the expense ratio, right? What expense ratio do we use as a rule of thumb? But anywhere between 30 and 40%, and sometimes more than that, depending on various things. That's why we need to know the utility setup. Because we know the utility setup, we know where we're going to be. So let me give you an example here before we sort of jump back into this. So if your best case scenario for utilities is we have a park that's like this actually. It's direct billed trash, direct billed water and sewer. So we don't get a trash bill, we don't get a sewer bill, we don't get any of that. Right. Now, this is a larger park. It's got a pool. So our expense ratio is, it is still in the 30s. But on some of these parks, you could actually get in the 25 or 30% range the more that it actually seasons. So if it's direct billed everything and there's no pool and there's no kind of ancillary things that you're going to spend the money on, you're going to be looking at around 30% stabilized. You also have to take in consideration the state you're buying in, the property taxes, how much they're going to increase. Because in Florida, if you raise the rents $50 when you acquire a park, all that's going to the increase in property taxes. Unless the guy bought it 2 years ago, and you're looking at, your property taxes aren't going to change that much unless he's just doubling the value in that amount of time, which may not be the case now. But you need to look at that because your property taxes will sort of determine that. Not to get off track there, but so if I've got, let's just say I have, all right, where the best case scenario is the direct build utilities, right? 25 to 30% stabilized, depending on various things, but I would just look at that. And look, one thing that I always do on expenses is I always overestimate expenses. If I think, okay, I think this thing can run at 25 or 30, I'm actually probably going to run it at 35 because you're always going to underestimate the expenses in these things. Because I'm telling you guys, there's stuff that happens, and the expenses always tend to run a little bit higher in the first couple of years than they'll run, 3, 4 in year 3, 4, and 5. So think about that. Second best case scenario is that you're paying for trash, the park owner, and you're billing back for water and sewer. Now, when you're billing back for water and sewer, that means that you've got a master meter at the front of the park that's then distributing water and the sewage to all your tenants. It's not like you guys, if you live in a house or live in an apartment, you're getting billed for that stuff because they're individually metered, but that's not the case on most mobile home parks. They actually get a bill. The owner pays for the water and sewer, and then they may bill it back to you, or they may not. So if they're billing it back to you, you're going to be in that maybe 30 to 35% range. It still could creep up to 40, depending on the park, right? Because when you're billing back utilities, I think we're at like 70% on some of our stuff now, bill back rate. I think 80 is good. You're never going to get to 100. I haven't heard any operator say that they're pulling in, they're recapturing 100% of their bill back. It's just not going to happen. And if you are, let me know, and let me know the secret to that. Because getting that bill back at 100% is difficult, if not impossible. And 80% is usually really, really good if you get anything over 80% on your recapture rate. That is fantastic. All right. So now, so we're looking at that. If you're billing back, you'll be still going to be 35 to 35%. And now when we're talking about private utilities, you could be up in the 35, 40, 45% range, right? And why is that exactly? Well, if you have a well system or you have septic at the park, it can be a little deceiving, because if you're looking at a P&L, you're like, shit, man, like I've got no septic expenses this month. I didn't pump the septics out, right? It can be a little deceptive, right? Because look, if nothing ever happened to your well, if nothing ever happened to your septic tanks, the expense ratio would be really low, because they're actually very cheap to run on a monthly basis. But you have to take into account the things that are inevitably going to happen throughout the year. If you have a well system, so in Florida, we have an operator come to the well, depending on if the park's had problems before. Like we have one park where they have to be there like 4 or 5 times a week, almost daily, like every other day. Some parks, they have to be there. Your well operator has to be there 2 times a week. And basically they're just checking the chemicals to see if if they're high, if they're over the regulations that they have in that particular municipality. But you're paying that guy monthly to do that. Typically, when you haven't had problems with the park, it's running from $200 to $300 to $400 a month. It's gone up a little bit. If they have to be there more, you could be closer to $700 to $1,000 a month, depending on how much they need to come by. If they need to add and buy more chlorine to put in your well, so that can vary your expense ratio too. But if the pump goes out, if the chlorinator goes out, this is all things that are going to happen throughout the year. Typically, there's going to be something. And so those expenses are typically going to run higher, but you may have some months where you're like, man, my utility expense is low because there were no problems. And the same with the septic tanks, right? You're going to have to pump them out. There may be something, if you have a lift station on site, all these variabilities, like it just comes with experience and underwriting stuff. And that's why I tell people, look, even if you're on LoopNet, Mobile Home Park Store, Correxy, it's a dumping ground for deals to a degree, but it's not a dumping ground for you it's not an excuse for you to not learn how to underwrite and to not understand how these numbers work, right? Because if you understand how these numbers work, you're going to be more confident when you're actually on the phone talking with the seller, because you're looking at this. So you're going to be like, dude, I understand this now because I've done this 150 times. But if you don't do it, you're not going to understand it. And so the repetitiveness and the amount of times that you're actually going through these deals will give you more certainty on them. So I talked a little about well and septic, and then the last thing, wastewater treatment plant, lagoons. I've never owned a lagoon, never looked at a lagoon. I just haven't really messed with them. I know that there's people that will. I guess if you understand them, you can actually do that. But the wastewater plant, now it in Florida, so typically it works the same as a well. You are required to have permits on the things. You're required to have an operator come out and essentially do the testing on the water to make sure everything's good on a daily basis. Really, I think they come out daily to the wastewater treatment plant. So you're paying these guys anywhere from $1,300, $1,500 up to $2,000 a month, depending on where you are, the size of the plant, and how much work to do. And that up, right? That's 2,000 times 12 is $24,000 a month, depending on how big the park is. That's a massive expense. So we have a park, it's a smaller park. It's a 30-lot park. And I think we pay Dave, trying to see how much we actually pay Dave to come out there, but I know it's $1,500 or something. Maybe it's $1,200. I'd have to look at that, but let's just call it $1,500. That's $18,000 there. Now, our gross revenue here is, I think so that's like 5%, anywhere between 5 to 10% of the gross revenue there. So look, it's a big expense, right? We're getting higher rents there, so it's fine. We're doing really, really well on that deal. But the expense ratio can be a little bit higher because you got a wastewater treatment plant. All right. So man, I could continue talking about utilities on a daily basis now, like just for hours, right? Because there's just so many little nuances in regards to these things. All right, so I'm going to go back and share here, and I'll talk through this for you guys that are listening here. So look, we have this 26 lot deal at $325 a month, all tenant owned homes. This is actually direct build stuff, right? So I'm looking at this. This is a Florida deal, so I know. So 325 times 26, that's 8,450 times 12. So I have $101,400 of gross revenue currently on the in-place income. Now, why am I saying 35% expense ratio? Well, because this guy has owned the park forever and his tax basis is really low. So you're going to get just slaughtered on property taxes. You might even be here. You might even be 40%. But let's just say 35. So actually, I'm going to take that 101,400. And if I'm doing this on my phone, I'm going to do times 0.65. And my NOI is $65,910. Okay. Now, one way I can look at this deal is I can take the $65,000, the NOI, that's the net operating income, and divide that by the purchase price. $1.3 million on this deal. Now, that is a 5 cap, right? Okay, that's a 5 cap deal. Is that a good deal in the in place? Small deal, Florida, could be, depending on how you're looking at deals, right? Probably a little overpriced. I mean, this is a nice park, but still, it's probably a little overpriced. All right. Now, this particular deal, let me just back up here. So that's one way you can look at it. You can check the cap rate. So maybe you've got a rule of thumb. Hey, I need an in-place 8 cap in year 1. This is a 5 cap that we just talked about. So I can mess with this here. I can mess with the purchase price. Let's say I take it down to 1.2 million. It's an in-place 5 cap, right? If you're still 5 cap, like if you need that in-place 8 cap, you need to be like 800 grand, right? So if that's your rule of thumb, right? Or maybe you say, okay, I can probably get the rents to 400 easily here. So maybe, so then you could pay $1 million for this deal. And you're going to be in an 8 cap in year 1. You go and take it to $400, probably relatively easily. This is in a great market in Florida. All right. But if you're looking at what the seller wants, he's probably not going to go down to $1 million. He wants 1.3. If you take it to 400 in year 1, it's a 6.2 cap. It still doesn't hit your metric there. Now, the other thing that I like to look at, so that's like looking at it from a cap rate perspective, an in-place cap rate perspective. Now, you can also look at this deal from a per lot purchase price perspective. So in this particular market, I know this is pretty good for this market, a $50,000 per lot purchase price. So that is why I looked at this deal. So I'm looking at this deal and I'm like, man, $50K a pad, excuse me, in this market. I'm like, shit, this is a pretty good deal. It's just, you're not going to find that of something that's this high quality. But the clincher is he's got this low rent. Now, is this a deal you could decide, it's in a great market, eventually at some point, I know the rent should probably be 700 in this market, so that's pretty good, right? Just depending on, you're just not going to have that much cash flow in year 1 or year 2, or maybe even year 3. All right. So that's another way to actually look at the deals. If you understand the market and know what a good per lot purchase price is, it's just another angle of looking at a deal. So we did the cap rate, like we can look at the in-place cap rate or what the cap rate would be after you do some value add things when you purchase the property. So that's good, right? So you can look at those two things. So also one thing, if you've been in real estate, where I like to look is the 1% rule. Now the 1% rule basically says that your per unit purchase price, if the amount of rent that you can get per month is 1% of that, then it is a good deal. So in this case, we're $50,000 per lot purchase price. Now the in-place rent, we are only at it's not a lot. We're like a 0.7% or something. Let's see, 325. Yeah. So we're 0.6. Like we're not at the 1% rule yet. The 1% rule would be what? It'd be $500, right? And so typically that's good. But nowadays, like if rates, we haven't even gotten this, so just ignore this. But if you're at 7.5 on a rate, the 1% rule is, not as great. Maybe you need 1.25% rule. But that can give you some indication of, whether this deal makes sense, is good for you and your purchasing criteria. And that's why in all my programs, guys, in my coaching program, I'm like, guys, you got to sit down. You got to figure out where you want to buy. You got to where the market that you want to buy in, right? For one, and you got to understand and figure out what kind of deals that you actually want to buy. Because if you don't understand like the deals and the kind of deals that you want to buy, like, well, it doesn't matter. Right? You're just going to be, hey, Derek, is this deal good? Hey, Derek, is this deal good? Like, this is how we were able to purchase so much stuff in 2021 really fast, because we had a specifically defined buy box. All right. And you can do all this stuff back of the napkin. You don't need this sheet, right? If you're on your phone, let's just say with this deal, we already did the cap rate method. You can do the 1% method in your head. Okay, it's 50,000 I've had. Rent's $500 a month. Okay, that might be decent, because if you take the rents to 550, or 575 in year one, you're a little over the 1% rule. So that could be good. And then also going back to this, we would want to look at this deal from a cash on cash perspective as well. Okay. So I'm looking at this. All right. So this deal, we're at 325. This deal has a seller financing component, 4%. I tried to offer this guy at a 30-year. Let's just assume that he takes it. Still not that great. But if we're going to 400 in year one, it might be okay. And maybe he gives us some interest only, which I asked for. Then you're at a 9.3% cash on cash return. Right. So, could be pretty good. I mean, it just depends on your deal, your criteria. Right. And I would look for, like, you probably, don't want to do something that's a 5% cash on cash return in year one. And you may, because I know this, they'll say you go to 450 in year 450 in year two. All right. 500 in year three, 550 in year four, 600, and maybe you end up, doing 60 but I know you can get 10% here easily every year. And so maybe after 5 years, this is a good little deal for you. Cause I'm telling you, this is a pretty nice deal. Like, it's just going to sit there. You aren't going to have that much problem with it. So that's a 13.4% cash on cash return. And even, let's just say he gives you 30-year AM, you're 14 after 5 years. So pretty decent deal. Pretty decent deal after 5 years. But, is this a good, how much capital do you want to put into this and blah, 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 right? So cash on cash return, decide what kind of cash on cash return that you actually want, right? And then that can give you another way to sort of look at a deal here. All right. And so if we're looking at this deal from, a cap rate perspective, like, okay, let's say after 5 years, we get the rents to 600, now, expenses, let's just say 32% after 5 years. You may even be a little lower than that because it's seasoned a little bit. Your exit cap, let's say a 7 cap, it's sort of uncertain now. You're at 1.8 million, after 5 years, 1.4 multiple. It's not that great. I like to at least double. I like the value to at least double in 5 years. So let's do a 6 cap. You're almost there. 5 cap. You're still not even quite at a double, but let's say maybe you can get the rents to 700 and even at a 7 cap. You just got to learn how to play with these numbers. You learn how to play with these numbers. Maybe you get a little more aggressive on the rent increases because they're so low. I mean, they should be $800 now in this market, $700-800. But you just got to make a decision whether that's your business plan or not. But you can't go in and just put the rents to market immediately. It's just not gonna be good. So those are different ways that you can look at these deals, and none of these, it's like, you may actually be like, hey, I want a 10% cash on cash or an 8% cash on cash, and that's it. And that's fine. You can do that. But also, like, if the rents are $200, these are just different ways to look at it. If you're in a great market, Charlotte, North Carolina, and you're getting something for $30,000 a pad, but the rent's $150, and it's in and around Charlotte, like, hey, that's a good $30,000 a pad around Charlotte. I think you might want to figure out how to do that one because you're just not going to find that anymore. And so that's why this deal was a little bit enticing, because I was looking at the price per pad and all these numbers you can do back of the napkin. Okay. Cause that's, you can just do this on your phone when you're talking to a seller. Now, a couple things to add here. All right. So we talked about the way that we were looking at deals. And now you're like, hey, Derek, so if the deal has park-owned homes, how do you value the park-owned homes? Well, this is kind of like a really broad topic, and there's many ways that you can actually do that. And so let's say this particular deal here that we were looking at, the 26, let's say half of them were park-owned homes, right? And they were getting, I don't know, $900 a month. Right now, what I'm going to do when I go in there, I'm actually going to flip those and sell those homes to the tenants, and I'm going to be able to put the rent at market or close to market when I sell those homes. And especially if I'm in a strong market. So I'm going to value those park-owned homes as like, hey, I'm going to value it based on the lot rent that is there. Maybe I'll give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt. If I know I can get $800 in the market, I may value those at, in this particular deal that we're talking about, as $500 a month versus the $325, if that makes sense. But typically when I'm valuing park-owned homes, I'm going to value them at basically the lot rent amount. So even if they're getting 800 and lot rent's 325, I'm still going to conservatively value that, at $300, or maybe, like I said, I'll give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt on that. And giving them maybe $500 because I know I'm going to flip them to 700 or 800 there. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I mean, it's sort of a loaded question, and it's very situational, because if you have a deal where the park-owned home rents are really, really low, like I'm not going to assign that much value to that. Like the park-owned home rent $600 at this park or $500 at this park we're looking at, theoretically. Like I'm just not going to give them that much. Not going to give them that much value because they're probably rough, and it's going to be not as easy to flip those. Okay. So the next thing here, we talked about park-owned homes. And if you have any questions, just shoot me an email at derek@victoryrealestategroup.com. Comment here, send me a message on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, whatever. All right. So there's other little things that you can have in your underwriting too, that it's always like mobile home parks come with some weird stuff too. So you may have apartments. You may have efficiency apartments like we have, vacant pads. I'll talk about vacant pads in a second. Single family homes, maybe some storage, maybe some RV storage, some boat slips, whatever. And so also if the RV lots are vacant, I'll go ahead and let me just jump into the vacant lots. So let's just say we have vacant lots there. Right. I usually do not assign vacant lots any value for a couple of different reasons, because it's not just like, hey guys, let's go move a home on these things. It takes a lot of capital to do that. A lot of work. Is the electric there? Is the electric up to code? Is the plumbing there? Is it up to code? Is the water there? Is it up to code? Right. Can you even move a new home in this municipality? Right. Can you do that? Is the lot big enough? Right? Do you have demand for it? So there's all these various questions that you need to ask. Now, I would typically not apply any value to that when I'm looking at deals. Now, I guess if you're in a market, if you've got the capital to bring in, and that's your business plan, to bring in used homes or new homes, and the infrastructure is there, it's up to code, right? Maybe you do assign a little bit of value to them. But even then, I'm going to really do a more conservative valuation underwriting and not, right? And, so the deal may work, if I'm assigning no value to them. But you can, because it typically costs, I would say, I don't know, $15,000 to get a lot up, maybe more, maybe less. But that's really what you're looking at. But I usually don't assign value to those. But your apartments, your single family homes and things like that you're going to have, that you're probably getting more rent for those than you are that's more than your lot rent. All right. We have that. So typically when I'm going in the deal and valuing those, I'm just valuing those. Let's say, I'm just valuing those at the lot rent amount. because you're going to have expenses, you're going to have things, you're going to have problems with those that you're going to have to fix. And so you doing a conservative evaluation. So for example, if I'm renting a single family home for $1,200, apartments are renting for $1,200, and the lot rent here is $600. In my underwriting, if there's 30 total units, 26 mobile homes and 3 apartments and 1 single family home, I'm just going to levelize that lot rent, right? So if it's $600, I'm going to underwrite it as if it's 30 at $600, because that's going to handle my expenses usually, right? And it's still being pretty conservative on your underwriting. All right, it's not ideal to have those things. They can be a pain. Some of ours have actually not been as bad as we had initially thought that they were. Okay. RVs, if there's an RV component, right? So if there's RVs there, this is sort of a loaded question too. Are they long-term? Is it transient? If it's a long-term RV and they've been there forever and they've got a porch built onto their RV, like, they ain't moving. Right? They're not moving it. Right? So that you're going to value that just as you would MH. Now, one little variable to that could be on the electric. Do they have their own meter, or are they plugged in where there's 4 RVs hooked into 1 meter and you're paying the bill? That can vary because those electric bills can be high where the RVs are pulling electricity there. All right. So it just depends on that. If there's an individual meter for the RVs, you're gonna run those numbers exactly like you would MH. But if not, it's going to be 50 to 55% expenses on that particular lot. So if you're getting $600 a month for an RV and you're paying for electric, first of all, you're not charging enough, depending on what market it's in. But you're going to be 50 to 55% expenses, because I guarantee that electric bill, depending on where you are, is $100, $200 a month. I mean, some of these RVs, they're not very energy efficient. So the ACs, they take a lot of power, and the electric bills are high in the summer and even in the cold months if you're in a cold area. And some other weird stuff that you can have. You can also have, and real quick, just to jump back on the single family home, same thing. If you're getting $1,200 a month for a single family home, I'm going to levelize that at whatever the lot rent is and underwrite it as that, typically. All right. And again, all mobile home parks are different. And so there may be situations where I don't do that. So a situation where, and I explained this a little bit earlier. So if I'm getting $1,200 for the single family home, lot rent's $325, and I know the lot rent should be a little bit higher. So maybe I value that home at a little bit higher of a lot rent and give them the benefit of the doubt on that. So I hope that makes sense. Last thing you can have storage units, RV storage, boat slips. Look, guys, unless they're 100% full, I'm not going to apply much value to these things at all. It's just going to be extra. I'm not going to have this ancillary stuff fully underwritten and that be the determinant of a deal in some of these smaller deals. Now, maybe in a massive deal where there's something and it's fully stabilized, it's Class A, maybe you would. But I'm just not going to underwrite that much of that income, because my investment is not going to be hindered upon whether Susie decides to keep her boat there in the next year or two. It's just going to be extra income for me. Okay. So look, guys, that's all I got for the MHP show today. This is the basics of underwriting. If you have any other questions or is anything I missed or left out, please comment. Please send me an email. Guys, leave a comment for me, man. This is I put in some effort in doing this, and I hope this episode helps you. If you want me to do more videos like this, we may start doing some live streams on a weekly basis. And if there's anything you want me to do a video on, I'd love to do it. So again, send me an email, write in the comments. So everyone, thank you for watching the MHP Show podcast. Like and subscribe. I'm on Instagram. I'm everywhere. I'm not hard to find. Peace out, and we will see you all next week.